Don't wear don't wear business. Don't wear business to in my wear. Don't wear don't wear business. Don't wear business to in my wear. Don't wear don't wear business.
I think it's best that I jump into theories, né? So that I won't bore you. We are looking at 3 types of theories which are debating about the control of education. Okay, so now we're going to be talking about Plato, we're going to be talking about Hobbes, who agrees with Plato, and we're going to be talking about John Locke, who is totally different from both of them. Okay, so when we are looking at Plato, you are talking about a philosopher. Back then, nobody just became a philosopher. It was a person who was highly educated, who was then named a philosopher, and his ideas and views were seen to be very important. So the ideas of Plato was that the state should be the one that controls education. Why? Plato believes that each and every person ought to be educated, and if they are not educated, they are then stuck in the darkness as a man who is in a cave who needs to be directed toward the light. Remember the allegory of the cave? That is actually talking about, in a metaphorical term, that the sun is education, and the man who was without education, after contact with the sun or the light into the cave, was now enlightened. And him being enlightened endured the responsibility to now get out of the cave, learn some more, and come back to emancipate everyone else who was stuck in the cave. What is this saying about education? This is now referring to the fact that if you want to be someone important in society, if you want to be a liberator, if you want to be a leader, get educated. And now, in order for unity in the country to be there, in order for peace, for stability to be there in the country, there needs to be one sole controller of education, which is the state. Why the state? Because the state is said to be built up of different types of souls that will cater for the different types of citizens who are in the country. So now, the state has to be made up of people who have got the gold soul, the silver soul, and the copper soul. So when you're looking at these types of souls, you're looking at types of people who've got certain levels of education. He's talking about a person who are thinkers. He talks about people who are the writers, the philosophers. He says that they ought to govern, they ought to form part of the governance of the state, thereby forming part of the governance of education. And then he talks about the military, he talks about the defenders of the country, he talks about the people who have taken up the responsibility to continue their plight to serve the country. They can be defined as silver souls. And then the copper souls are the people who prefer to be in the lower class, the people who care less about education, the people who now are to be seen as the working class, to be seen as the peasants. They are seen as the peasants because their souls lack a certain capacity of being educated. Another interesting characteristic about his evaluation of the control of education is that each and every person has been gifted by God to have that type of soul. So we can say that Plato was a believer in God, and therefore felt that each and every class in society was the way it was because of God's will. It moves on to talking about the different types of ways of which the state can be able to provide this, moving on to the different types of souls, moving on to the different types of administration that is to be given in the government. And now when you look at Hobbes also agrees. It's just that his control of education in the formation of the state, it comes in the form of a king. So he is much more reliant, or he believes much more in the control of the king being the one who rules and governs over the control of education, because he believes that the king has been given the wisdom to be able to rule and govern his people peacefully. A key concept or key word in Hobbes's interview or theory rather is the connotation or the terminology of the Leviathan. Leviathan is seen as this great god who is all-knowing and who's powerful and who is able to take care of the people in that state. Okay, and now a person who seems to be disagreeing with both of them is John Locke. John Locke believes that the parents are the ones who should be controlling education. He says they are the ones who know their children better, therefore they've been given a God-given gift to be able to teach their children. He says that each and every child is born without any knowledge, tabula rasa, meaning that they are empty slates, they need to be imparted with knowledge. And then once that occurs, you will find that each and everyone will now be able to have a type of education that is controlled and built around morality and ethics. All right, so now if you are now asked to critique these theories, you would be able to talk about the fact that if the state provides or controls the education system, there are certain types of people who receive a certain type of education. As there are different types of souls, how is it possible to receive the same type of education which is equal and fair for everyone? And then if you are looking at the parental control of education, how is it possible to receive, also in the same context, the same type of education for everyone? Because it is not every parent who was educated. It is not every parent who has ambitions of their children becoming something that they do not dream for them. You know the tendencies that parents normally have, that they dream for children, they decide for children what type of qualifications they should take up. What type of administration now is to govern what type of education that the parents give to the children. Those are just a few flaws. You're more than welcome to ask more questions about these theories that I have covered right now. So, I'm going to be moving on to talking about personal, simple relativism and personal sophisticated relativism. I call these the isms because there are a lot of relativisms that you deal with. There's also e-cultural relativism, there's also utilitarianism, there is, that is it. Those are the isms that we're going to be dealing with. So now, when we're looking at personal, simple relativism, firstly, I want you to understand ukuthi makuthiwa personal relativism, the theme or the topic is ethics and morality. Is this good or bad? So how do you personally relate to whether something is good? How do you personally relate to whether something is bad? Personal relativism is how you, on your own, personally define what is good and how you interpret what is bad. The argument here is that personal relativism is rather a naive way of looking at morality, because if you are going to be talking about whether something is good or bad and it is based on your own personal opinions, it is then flawed. It says that you cannot debate about facts because a fact is a fact. If that is a chair, it is a chair. Now, personal relativism comes in when you feel that a chair should be a certain way or the chair should be in a certain place. That is how you feel. If your opinion that all the chairs should be on the right-hand side and another person has got an opinion that all the chairs should be on the left-hand side, that is what you call personal relativism. You cannot now determine whether this person is right or wrong, and now it makes it very difficult to actually say that this is morally or ethically correct or not. I'll repeat it again. If you have a certain opinion, the other person has got an obligation of respecting your opinion. And if they have a different type of opinion, you also have the obligation of respecting their opinion. You cannot now debate about whether it is right or wrong for a certain thing to be done in a certain way, because what may be right for you may be wrong for me. Therefore, personal relativism makes it very flawed to receive an objective, moral, or ethical grounding. Okay, so if you are going to be looking at morals and ethics, it is very important to consider the part or the portion of reasoning. Are your feelings aligned to facts, and are the reasoning good enough for another person to be persuaded into believing what you are believing? If not, it remains your own opinion and you carry on with it until you find it difficult to carry on with it and you drop it. And if it is good enough and it's got enough weight, another person will then believe it and they'll be persuaded and encouraged to believe in the same thing as that you do. So now, what's the difference between simple personal relativism and sophisticated personal relativism? When you're talking about sophisticated relativism, this is a theory that was defended by David Hume. David says that sophisticated relativism is heavily reliant on this thing called the affection of humanity. What are we talking about? He says that morality functions as sort of a referee between what? Between your selfish desires, your ambitions, your greed, and the affection of humanity, or how other people feel, the passions, the emotions, the feelings. Okay, so when you're looking at the feelings of you and everyone else, morality, and you're looking at your greed and your desires and your ambitions, it is where morality comes in to say, are you acting selfishly or not? And then that is what becomes sophisticated. It's sophisticated because it's either you consider the emotions of other people, and that's what makes it, well, generally right, or you do not consider it, and then it becomes generally incorrect. I keep saying generally. Why? Because when you are looking at the passions, as he calls them, the affection of humanity is highly dependent on the passions. What are the passions? The emotions of the general public. And it is looking at your greed, your ambitions, and your desires. What are your desires? To want you to do a certain thing pushed by your own feelings. Morality now comes in either to hold you from doing something wrong or to make you see it from a point of view of other people. It's sophisticated because it now not only makes you have a lens of a personal type of seeing it, like the simple personal relativism, but it digs deeper into whether the general public also relates to that moral grounding or not. Now, the critique or the criticism of Hume by Rachel is that it is not true that Hume says sophisticated personal relativism is pushed by emotions and then reason. Reason is only a slave of the passions. Or to Rachel, it is highly impossible that the reasoning behind decisions or moral, ethical grounding is a slave of the passions, because you have to have good reasons for doing something before you can substantiate your defense with saying that you felt in a certain way. Yes, the general public may feel a certain way, but the fact still remains that a chair is a chair, and if it is in the way, it ought to be removed. And there is situations you ought to act in a certain way, or the situation right now is like this. It is a fact that you ought to act in a certain way, and it is also a fact that you feel in a certain way. But what makes morality an issue here, which is critiqued by Rachel, is the fact that your reasoning has to have a lot of weight before it can be considered to be good reasoning enough. Therefore, sophisticated relativism cannot be based on emotions and then reasoning afterwards. Well, Hume tries to say that the feelings of the majority ought to be considered, and then that moral or ethical grounding will be considered to be good. And Rachel says it is not actually like that, it's actually the other way around. There has to be a heavy weight of reasoning, and then the emotions will be considered. And in fact, the emotions about whatever situation there is, which is debatable, does not change that situation, whether you're debating about it or not. You cannot wish a situation away, you cannot desire a situation away, but you need to consider whether the facts on the ground are enough and the reasons on the ground are enough to try to persuade another person to think like that. I've covered the personal relativism and the sophisticated relativism. Now I'm going to be moving on to cultural relativism in a few minutes. All right now you're going to be doing existentialism. Existentialism. This is all about existence. This is all about continuing the debate that morality cannot be objective and in fact it is subjective. All right. In your book, in 12.3.2, it says existentialism, at least in the form advocated by the 20th century French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, similarly emphasizes the subjectivity of morality. It too denies that morality can have an objective basis, but for different reasons. The following is an adaptation of Sartre's literature existentialism.
Do me a favor, please.
Is a humanism, first published in 1946. Okay, there is an excerpt here which talks about God and the fact that many Christians believe that if God does not exist, then a lot of things would be wrong. And the debate here is basically about whether it is correct to say that there is a higher power in nature and in humanity as a whole. Okay, so the book says both personal relativism and existentialism deny that there are any moral truths, or at any rate, they both deny the objectivity of morality, moral norms, principles, and values. Both views minimize the role of reason in morality, but for different reasons. Personal relativism locates the basis of morality not in reason, but in feeling, passion, or as Hume calls it, affection of humanity. These sentiments arise in humanity are not only common to all human beings, but they are the same in all of us. Okay, remember what I was saying about Hume? That he says that morality, yes, it's not subjective, and there is a general passion that everyone has. Okay, so Manjage, they say existentialism, on the other hand, at least as it is advocated by Sartre, denies that there is anything that could be called human nature.
Say
So
what?
this guy is saying that there's nothing called human nature. Nobody's born with human nature. Nobody knows what human nature is. It is the idea of humans that there is human nature. Okay. So now he carries on to say at the moment of birth, human beings are blank slates, tabula rasa, characterized in essence neither by feeling nor by reason. Uzwi? So when you are born, you are not characterized by whether you felt like being born or whether you are, and guys, you have any reason to be born. Like, it's not as if you knocked on your mom's tummy and said, hey yo, I have a reason to be born now because it is very hot in your tummy. There was no reason. He says that there is no feeling as well. You didn't get born, or you weren't born because you felt like being born. Let's carry on with this theory. I don't agree with it, by the way. So he says that we define ourselves essentially by the choices we make. The basis of morality is our total freedom to act, to make whatever choices or decisions we do make. And in fact, we have a responsibility to act. However, for personal relativism, feeling has a motivational content insofar as it precedes and influences action. For
Get out of here.
existentialism, action precedes feeling. What does that mean? In personal relativism, it's feeling and then action. In existentialism, it is action and then feeling. Okay? And this says, okay, he makes an example. Uti for existentialism, action precedes feeling. The existentialist does not believe in the power of passion. Sartre writes, he thinks that man is responsible for his passion. Feeling is formed by the deeds that one does, therefore I cannot consult it as a guide to action. Okay, so he does not feel that if you want to do something, if you want to act in a certain way, you have to feel like acting in a certain way, and then you act like it. He says that I cannot consider it as a guide, meaning that I cannot consult my feelings, I cannot consult my emotions, and then act on them. I still don't agree. So now, he carries on to say, as with personal relativism, the chief problem with existentialism is the failure to acknowledge the fundamental role of reason in morality. The dilemma that satire mentions, should the student stay with his mother or should he join the armed struggle? Certainty is serious. However, nothing in satire's account would prevent the student from embarking on a third course of action, namely becoming a collaborator with the apartheid government, and this seems to be counterintuitive, to say the least. Uthini Manjula was an example of a child who is governed by their mom. And now they have to choose whether they join the army or they don't. And now, usatire, it's either the child stays with the mother or the child joins the army. But either way, the child still has a third option of what? Being a collaborator with the apartheid regime. Why? Because the child has got the power of choice. So the child does not have emotions that precede his decision making, but has got the power to act, and then will feel whatever he feels after his actions. So it is the actions that spur an emotion. It is an action that make a person act in a certain way. Therefore, morality is only guided by an action, not by any type of rule or governance from another person, not by feelings or emotions. Okay, if you have any more questions on existentialism, this word gave me trouble, you can drop it on the comments. Okay, now we're moving on to cultural relativism. I think this one is very simple because you are basically talking about culture. Okay, the book defines it as another kind of meta-ethical theory is the view that morality is relative to a particular culture, society, or group of individuals. Our concern will be the following key questions. Does cultural relativism provide a viable guide in curriculum evaluation and educational assessment? Does multiculturalism entail relativism? What is wrong with cultural and moral relativism, and what can be learned from it? What are we talking about now? We're talking about cultural relativism as a guide or a tool to be used in education. So wonke lama relativisms that we are doing right now have to be aligned with education. They have to be aligned with whether they can be tools that can be instilled in the classroom. Okay, so when you're talking about personal relativism and you're taking it and putting it in the educational context, is you going to be considering whether you will be able to act in a certain way because you feel in a certain way when it comes to education. You are given an assignment, you're given a test, and when you talk about personal relativism, you will personally relate to the test if you feel that the test is too difficult. Personal relativism says you'll find it wrong to write the test. And then your sophisticated personal relativism says, yes, if the majority of the learners in the classroom find the test difficult, it is wrong for the test to continue. And then when you're looking at existentialism in the classroom with the very same example, it says that there will be an action first and then the feeling later. So it means that everyone will write the test because there is no human nature, there are no feelings, and you are not considering your emotions as a guide. You will see this difficult test, write it, fail it, and then feel a sense of failure. I think we're together. And then now we're going to cultural relativism. So if we are talking about cultural relativism, we're going to be looking at the classroom and this difficult test. And then in your defense, if you write the test, as difficult as it was, and you don't pass it, you can now defend yourself using culture. In my culture, it is not right to write a test if I did not burn incense. Understand? So you'll be now blaming a certain ritual in your culture having not been done. That is why you failed. So if you are looking at cultural relativism, you are looking at an instance where you're going to be taking a cultural context, putting it in the educational context, and now trying to defend yourself with it, or trying to align the education system with your culture. So now the question is, if we were to use cultural relativism in the classroom, would we have an even education system? The answer is not. No, we're not going to have it, because each and everyone has got a different type of culture. Okay, and to extend on cultural relativism, you may be born in a certain culture. Remember, I said relativism is how you relate to a certain concept in that, or to morality and ethics. And now we're going to be looking at the fact that you may be born into, say, a certain culture. Let's say it's the Zulu culture or the Xhosa culture or whatever tribe there is. And there is a culture that is performed every September. It is the culture of virginity testing. And you are not really comfortable with it, not because you're not a virgin, but because you feel this type of culture infringes on your dignity. So now, if you are in a community that understands that in September all the virgins go to the king's kraal and present themselves as pure virgins, and you decide not to go, you know very well that you're going to be looked at in a certain way. So now relativism comes in the form of culture as to say, do you now relate to the reason behind why it is being done or not? And how does it affect education? You may feel that it is a waste of time to go to where the virginity testing occurs, because during September there are September trials and you want to finish your grade 11 or your grade 12 and get your matric. Now, you also feel that even though culture dictates that everyone in the community ought to confirm that you are a virgin and that you are behaving as a child